You say in the book, there is masculine order and feminine chaos.
No, actually, I say that those are symbolic representations of the two things.
Right, okay. So why? Why is order masculine?
I think it's because our primary social hierarchy structures are fundamentally masculine.
And that's not the patriarchy?
Well, it's not the modern idea of the patriarchy, that's for sure.
I mean, that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
Very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
But I could say equally well that most rape victims are women. Terrible things happen to people of both sexes.
And you could say that with perfect utility, but that doesn't provide any evidence for the existence of a male-dominated patriarchy. Well, it just means that terrible things happen to both genders, which they certainly do.
But there are almost no women who rape men, for example. So that is an asymmetry there in sexual violence.
Well, yes, there's an asymmetry in all sorts of places, but that doesn't mean that Western culture is a male-dominated patriarchy. The fact that there are asymmetries has nothing to do with your basic argument.
No, but you might equally...
This is a trope that people just accept. Western society is a male-dominated patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true. And even if it has a patriarchal structure to some degree, the fundamental basis of that structure is not power, it's competence. That's why our society works. It's only when a structure degenerates into tyranny that the fundamental relationships between people become dependent on power. It's not power. If you hire a plumber who's likely to be male, it's not because there's roving bands of tyrannical plumbers forcing you to make that choice. And it's the case with almost every interaction that you have at the face of our culture. You're dealing with people who are offering a service of one form or another, who are usually part of the broad middle class, and what you're looking for is the person who can offer the best service, and you can find it. It's not a consequence of being dominated by anything that's tyrannical. And then again, our culture, our Western culture, which is by no means perfect, and certainly has tyrannical elements, like all cultures do, is the least tyrannical society that's ever been produced, and certainly the least tyrannical society that exists now. So where's the patriarchy exactly in all of this?
Well, saying that it's the least tyrannical society is not the same as saying it's not a tyrannical society.
That's exactly why I said it was the least tyrannical
But that's
society.
what I mean. So you haven't debunked the existence of patriarchy then. You've said that actually now is better for women.
I don't have to debunk it. You have to demonstrate its existence.
Okay, well, let's go through it. I'm writing a book about feminism in the moment. Until 1919, there were professions that women were barred from. They simply were not allowed to do it. Until 1880s...
Why would you blame men for that?
Because who was in those professions, who was guarding entry to those professions, who was worried about losing their status if women became doctors?
What do you think it was that emancipated women in the 20th century, just out of curiosity?
Well, a couple of different things. I think it was technology. I think it was the pill helped enormously because it gave
when was that developed?
Well, in the 60s.
Right, so that wasn't 1919.
No, but I also think it was a series of legal changes that started in Britain with the Married Women's Property Act, which said for the first time women are full legal beings under the law. They can own property. And that, to me, is a structure that has continued throughout, from a time when women didn't have the same legal rights as men to now when they mostly do, but culture still lags behind it. I don't think you and I are necessarily talking at such cross purposes. It's just that your conception of patriarchy, as I see it in the book, is that quite a lot of men are quite nice and they do nice things for women. And
no, that's not my conception of patriarchy. And I don't require men or advise them to be nice, ever.
Well, you do talk about the guy who's the tampon king, the sanitary towel king of India, right?
I wouldn't call that nice.
Okay,
I would call that brave.
Okay.
Did you read about his life when he was trying to develop that?
Yeah.
God, it was absolutely miserable, and he did it anyways. He freed all sorts of women as a consequence.
And I think that was
nice. That's courageous. That's noble. That's visionary. It's not nice.
Was seen at the turn of...
I worked in daycares when I was 18, 19.
Right.
You know, there were no men in it.
And how did that make you feel?
I loved it.
Yeah.
You know, the kids, I used to wrestle with the kids, which of course can't do now because everybody knows that would just be a catastrophe. And I used to draw them pictures of monsters and they'd line up for that. And I liked working with kids quite a lot, and I didn't care whether it was female-dominated. I've been in female-dominated my professions my whole life.
Right, I think...
I haven't felt marginalized as a consequence.
Well, then you have been lucky, and I have talked to people who have
might be luck.
The opposite.
Might be careful conduct as well.
Explain that more to me.
Well, why would you assume that it would be luck?
Well, if I say that, there is a statistical analysis, and I've talked to a broad range of people, and, you would always expect outliers at either end. Some people have had a really terrible time, some people have had a really brilliant time, everybody else in the middle.
One of the things that I've strived to do is not to become resentful.
Well, okay, that's very good. I have to say that your Twitter feed does not give me that impression. You come across as somebody who takes criticism very much to heart. Is that true?
I don't think you have any grounds for that suggestion. I mean, you've seen my interviews online. If I was someone who took criticism at heart, I'd be in a lot more trouble than I am now.
In what way?
Well, I've been criticized endlessly for 2 years. I've been in scandals. I've probably been in, I don't know how many scandals in the last 2 years, and had unbelievably contentious interviews with journalists online, on TV, on radio, in podcasts. If I was someone who couldn't tolerate criticism, the evidence for that would already be clear. Twitter's a strange social network. I've kind of pulled myself away from it. So it's not an easy place to conduct yourself with as much grace as you might. And I think it sort of rewards impulsivity because maybe it's because of the constraint on characters or something like that. So I think that people tend to show their worst on Twitter, and some of that's a consequence of the structure of the technology.
I think I certainly agree with you. I think that's something that we agree on there. I think people are rarely at their best on Twitter.
No, and I pulled myself away from it quite a lot in the last month. I don't think Twitter's been good for me, and I don't think the reply function on Twitter is useful, and I think the fact that so many people on Twitter are anonymous is not a good thing at all.
Do you think you'd be less angry if you went on Twitter? That's something I think quite a lot. I would be come into contact with less things that annoyed me on a daily basis.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that. Yeah. I think that's definitely the case. And I've talked to other people who've pulled back from Twitter and experienced the same thing. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's something about Twitter that seems to really heighten the desire of people to be provocative. And maybe it's the case that only people who are feeling irritable respond. We don't know, like if you put up a post and 1,000 people read it, certainly 1,000 people don't respond. A few people respond. Well, maybe it skews way over to those people who had a bad day. Like, we have no idea, right? Because it's a communication channel that no one understands. We're not evolved to understand it. We're not evolved to use it. We can't interpret it. Plus, you're interacting with random strangers, which is something you never, ever do. And it's never the same set of random strangers. And you don't react to Twitter like it's random strangers. You react to Twitter like it's a person that you know. And it isn't.
Also, the other thing I was really interested to read was that you married your teenage sweetheart.
Yeah, well, I met her when I was 8. So we've known each other for 50 years, yeah.
Because to me, if you don't mind me saying so, you are a man who is quite feminine. You're in touch with your feminine side. You are very well dressed. You talk a lot about your diet. You've talked about your emotions.
I hate talking about my diet.
Right, but you cry in public. You enjoy spending time with your kids. All of these things that are not
sad, isn't it?
But they're not stereotypically male, and I think that's very admirable.
Pretty strange behavior for a patriarchal tyrant.
Well, that's why I think...
You need to have the capacity for danger. You need to be dangerous. But you need to learn how to not use it except when it's necessary. And that is not the same as being harmless. Harmless, that's a terrible virtue. It's like a rabbit. There's nothing virtuous about harmlessness. It just means you're ineffectual.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Well, I think there are some people who through their harmlessness become iconic and they become symbols. I think the Gandhi and the principle of non-violence.
He's not harmless. He just transcended his deep violence. That is a completely different thing.
Okay.
Without that capacity, there would have been no way he would have had the strength of character that he had. He was an integrated person, not a harmless person.
Okay.
That's a very, very different thing.
Are you still eating your all-beef diet?
Unfortunately, yes.
Really, just beef? Not? Can you have ketchup on it?
Nothing. Right. Yes, I wouldn't. It isn't something I would lightly recommend. It's a little hard on your social life. It makes traveling quite difficult, and it's dull as hell. But
what has it done for you?
Well, I lost 50 pounds in 7 months. I stopped snoring. I had some autoimmune conditions that seem to have gone away. I'm not taking antidepressants. My mood isn't perfectly regulated, but I'm under a fair bit of stress, so that might have something to do with it. I sleep much less. I can work more.
Imagine
I
your
don't have
arteries might
GERDs.
not be in
I
great shape.
I don't think there's any evidence that I don't think we have any idea what causes arteriosclerosis. I think all of the dietary knowledge we have is rubbish. And partly because it's unbelievably difficult to do proper dietary studies. You can't do controlled studies. It's all correlational, and there's so many variables. I think the correlational studies are useless. So also this all meat diet, this all beef diet has apparently cured my daughter. So,
Who had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis?
Well, that was the original diagnosis, and it was idiopathic, which means we don't know what the hell's causing it. Yeah, but she's completely symptom-free. So that sort of thing makes you sit up and take notice, because it doesn't make any sense.
And it's working. You know, you see someone like Elon Musk. I mean, what the hell do you make of someone like that? You know, I mean, what did he do? He made an electric car, which is basically impossible, and it works, which is basically impossible. And then he built an infrastructure so that you could charge the damn thing wherever you drove, and that was basically impossible. And then he made it cheap, because if you buy an electric car and you factor in the price of gas, the electric car is actually about as expensive as the gasoline car, and so that was unbelievable. And then he built a bloody rocket, which was 1/10 the price or less of a NASA rocket that you could reuse, which was impossible. And then he put one of his cars on top of the rocket, and he shot it up into space. And then this happened, right? This all happened, and he's still alive. And, you know, and then he went and blew it all by smoking pot on Joe Rogan, you know, because, well, it's so funny, you know. We like our insane geniuses, like predictable and safe. And so we don't want them doing strange things like having a tiny puff of marijuana on a show famous for marijuana. So, I mean, it's patently ridiculous. First of all, most children who are popular, let's say, universally popular, and who do well socially, aren't bullies. They're good at playing with others. And they learn that between the age of 2 and 4. And they learn very straightforward rules, like reciprocity. That's the big one. There's a couple. Reciprocity is one. Trust is another, to abide by your word. But those are the same thing. Reciprocity and trust are very similar. It's like, well, you know, we'll take turns. You play my game now, and I'll play your game tomorrow. You know, and you guys have had friends that were real friends, and you know perfectly well that if you have a good friend, you don't have to keep track exactly of what you do for each other. You don't write it down on a piece of paper and, you know, put a check mark beside it, unless you're a little bit on the paranoid side, and that's only the beginnings of your problems. And what you do is, you know, you kind of keep track of who does what for who, and you kind of keep the balance equal. And you do that because, well, that's what you do if you're awake and conscious and a decent person. And if you have a relationship, if you're in a marriage, it's the same thing. You know, it's like you don't obsessively keep track of who owes what, when, and why. That's a sign of a degenerating relationship. What you do is, well, you do what you can for your partner, and they do what they can for you, and you're both aware of that, and you assume goodwill, and with any luck, that iterates across time, and it's a sustainable game. It's not bloody power. And you know, there's nothing more miserable than being in a relationship where the rule is do what the hell I want or suffer the consequences. You know, and what kind of relationship are you going to get out of that? Even if the person is cowed enough to do what you want them to do when you're there and enforcing it, they're not going to put their whole heart into it. That's bloody well for sure. They're going to be, if they have any sense at all, and they do, and if they have any spirit at all, and they do, they're going to be undermining what you're forcing them to do all the time. There's an old Soviet joke. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. Right, great. That's a hell of a way to run a society. And that's exactly how that society ran. So all you do with force is engender bitterness and resentment. And if the person that you're exerting force on can't exert the same level of physical force back, it's not like they're not going to take their revenge in other ways. They're not going to cook you wonderful meals. They're not going to be, what would you call it, enthusiastic sexual partners. You know, they're going to get their revenge when they can, unless you've crushed their spirit completely. And then it serves you right, because then you're dragging around behind you someone whose spirit you've crushed completely. And that's a hell of a way to live. And so what is this idea that our society is fundamentally predicated on power? You know, and then that's the postmodern claim. We group ourselves into our groups, whatever the hell they happen to be, sex, gender, ethnicity, whatever the flavor of the month is. There's an infinite number of ways we could group ourselves, and then we organize ourselves into power hierarchies and we dominate each other. And then all of those groups go to war against one another, and the most dominant group that has the most power wins. It's like, I don't know what the hell planet Foucault grew up on. You know, that might be the definition of like the worst African dictatorship of the last 100 years. But it's not a description of our society.